We took out another pew and eventually decided that this space is prime space for instance the bells. I mean, that's the kind of prominent location that the bells should have rather than, back over against the wall, the folk group, the dulcimers and all the, the different musical things that go on. That's been a big motivator. So what we did was we took out the rest of the pews here a couple weeks ago, figuring if we didn't have fixed pews and we could put in these chairs, for one thing, they could be angled to look over this, more towards the altar instead of looking over towards the other wall. And it left this space open for either people to sit or for musical groups or for other types of maybe smaller gatherings could happen over here. It just makes it flexible. So let's have another show of hands. Someone suggested we put recliners over here. I'll vote for that. I sat over there this morning, and it's I think some of the nicest seats in the house now, much better than they were. But that was, we're sort of looking for ways to take steps and to see what the result is. So that's that. We're also looking on some of the other priorities. Why don't you back up to the list of priorities one? That's it. Small services and activities. Those may go well over here. Better space for the chancel choir. They're a little squeezed in over there sometimes. We're looking at maybe creating a little more floor space over there for those folks. In the front for funerals, I haven't been to one that had a casket here, but I've heard that these front rows get in the way of even getting a casket in here and having communion or moving around. So a little more space up front, and maybe more space for again, musical groups, children's choirs, things like that. Wheelchairs, walkers, we've never really had good locations to put those. I'm thinking over here would be pretty prime for that sort of thing, or for anyone who has trouble dealing with the regular pews. Also, something that's been brought up is access to the altar. Some folks don't do steps. Well, what we're thinking is to put a couple steps in here with a nice sturdy railing to make it easy for people to get up there without negotiating the curved, couple of steps that we have there. So that's the sort of things we're thinking about. Now, we've taken this step, and we have enough chairs to fill it if we like. There's some other things that we're thinking of, and why don't you jump ahead, go to the next one. Go back. Okay, this is again a step we're considering, and that is let's see, in that picture, we took out the front pews, but also over in this area, it's really tight. This is probably a building code violation. But what we're thinking is to shorten these 4 rows of pews here. The couple that you're in, you'd be standing right now. But shorten those here and create an open floor space and a clear passage going out this way. Let's see, we're thinking about over here. We actually already took out a little single seat that was back there just to open it up a little bit, and actually moved one of the pews, which I doubt if anybody noticed, but it was sort of over that way, and we just put it over this way a little bit. So I can show you that if you like. So that's the sort of things we're looking at. And are there any questions?
With the shortening, what we did on Easter, like add that in chairs as needed. It allows for that.
Yes. Actually, I know some people are going to be wondering about, seating capacity. Are we going to be impacting that? With the whole place full of pews, the way we had it, capacity was about 220 between all the pews, some chairs over here, some chairs over there. Over on this side, we're not going to lose really any seating, maybe one, just because the chairs fit over there nicely. If the bell tables were not there, there'd be room for a whole lot more chairs. There was like 30 in the pews there and another dozen in the row of chairs over here. So we really wouldn't lose any there. If we moved out these two in the very front and shortened those over there, the overall reduction in seating capacity would be about a dozen. So it would go from 220 to, I calculated, around 207 in the sanctuary. And we still have, of course, in addition to that, the narthex for overflow. So, what we're doing we're not really reducing the capacity in a way that we're going to feel and that's going to, is going to affect us in any kind of significant way. Yes?
How many funerals a year with caskets do we have?
I don't know. How many funerals a year? In a good year or a bad year? In a good year, no funerals.
Suggesting taking out front pews to accommodate caskets, I want to know how many a year we're looking at to make that significant a change.
So I think the thing about funerals, the last few years have been really strange because we couldn't have any for a little while, and so people's patterns about funerals have shifted. I don't know what the longer term trends are going to be. I can say prior to 2019, it was maybe 2-3 a year. I'd have to look exactly, but I mean, funerals between cremation and casket, let's put it that way, are maybe 2 cremations for every 1 casket or so. If I just kind of had to do it, so in any given year, I don't know how many funerals there are going to be, and so that would depend. I think what might be helpful in this is, Bob is kind of introducing a couple different layouts, and this is kind of a middle layout to think about with pews. And the taking pews out doesn't preclude putting chairs back in for certain services to ensure spaces. So like you noticed on Easter, we added additional chairs along the side to lengthen these pews. So it just limits the fixed seating, but doesn't affect whether we can at times add in more mobile seating for movable seating for specific circumstances. So like in this option, for example, if we found a regular need for the seating, there's nothing that would stop us from having a row of chairs as the front pew, for example. But taking away the fixedness of pews gives more flexibility for when things like a recital happens and the piano needs to be moved out more towards the center as the focal piece, or a casket coming in. Right now, we can't have pallbearers bring a casket in or a recess from the sanctuary because you can't fit people on either side of a casket down our center aisle. So a casket, when it's present in a funeral, is always stationed before the service starts. It's set up and arranged before a service starts because our center aisle is not wide enough. So it's simply to think about, I think what is important to think about is the ratio of fixed seating versus flexible seating. That's really the subject of conversation, because nothing precludes us from adding in seating like chairs or other things. It's a question of how much seating in this space needs to remain fixed. Pews are fixed. When a pew is there, we have to work around it. Yeah.
So flexibility is what we're looking for.
When my former church went through a renovation, one of the
Well, with what we're talking about now, I see wheelchairs being easily accommodated in very good locations over on this side. There would be space over there for wheelchairs. So that's kind of the extent that we've thought about it. Right now, wheelchairs, I believe, mostly go back in that corner, which seems to me anyway a little remote. Like you said, not expecting and here you go, oh, you sit here.
Sunday morning as much as it is occasional services, particularly for wheelchairs. Funerals, you get a lot of older folks that come with handicap issues, not just wheelchairs, but walkers, et cetera, et cetera. Significantly as well, when you do a wedding, when you do a wedding, if grandma is not a family member and is just a friend, you want to make sure she can see. So you have to deal with that as well. Because she either the wheelchair sits with the family or the wheelchair sits where they can't see at all. So you've got that as a challenge for the things we don't see on Sunday morning. I think the other question I have is, are you going beyond what you suggested? Because my issue is lighting. And my handicap is the ability to see, let alone that. So I carry a light with me to help me with that. But churches notoriously are darkened places with a lot of shadows, and that just makes me unable to function. So think along those lines as well as hearing. People with, do you have a loop? Okay, you're all set then. You're good to go. Are we aware of a loop?
We have a loop-like thing that's a wearable thing. The room has not got a loop, but we have wearable reinforcement things.
One other thing, if you're going to put chairs in, especially if you have someone that is handicapped but wants to sit in an actual chair, they need to have arms on them, because otherwise they can't easily get up and for transferring and things. So, you know, to have at least a few chairs that have arms on them would be very essential.
Or quite a few chairs with arms on them. Well, you know, with the pews, you have a good sturdy place to grab on. Bill?
Hard to make people room up front. Seeing them not doing the kneeling communion anymore. They never thought of shortening up the front platform, the semicircle, bringing it back toward the
No. Okay, Bill's asking if we've thought about maybe reducing the size of the altar raised area, right? And no, we haven't thought about that.
maybe more space up there, if you shortened it by a couple of feet.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and you know, the way we're thinking about it is, yeah. Okay, well, we'll ponder that.
I want to I'm going to, if I can, I want to show, because some people have started to ask some questions about seating. And so I just want to show some pictures, because often when we think about seating or flexible seating, we think pews or chairs, because that is what we have. I happened to visit a church when I was in Minnesota last summer who had just done a sanctuary refresh, a very traditional old-style church, long, narrow, and they took out all of their pews and they replaced them with flexible seating. If you look at this, you will see that this is there are some of them that are like double width, some of them are triple width, some of them are kind of like quadruple width, and some of them are single. So they look more pew-like than what we often think of when we think of chairs, but you can configure them in different widths and things like that, so that they just provide a little bit more flexibility. The other thing you will notice is that some of them have arms. Same thing. I heard the same thing when I visited this church, that when they worked with the planners,
they said, you need to make sure that some of them have arms because people need help getting up. And so some of the singles have arms, but even some of the doubles have arms. And so that's part of the plan that's built into that. So I'd show you this not just to expand our ways of thinking, that there are options other than just fixed length pews or individual chairs. So there are a lot of different options about what seating can look like in a sanctuary today that probably wasn't available when the sanctuary was redone. So that's just an informational piece, just so you kind of think about that. I think the other thing that Bob hasn't said that's just really important to realize is that we have been slow to take action on replacing the carpet, which is what started all of this, because we got to figure out what the seating is going to look like, so we know where there's either going to be carpet or not going to be carpet, or whatever that is going to be. So one decision has to be made before the other decision can be made. Otherwise, we're just going to end up redoing this in a few years, and that's not going to be. At some point, it's likely that we may need to do this again, and we want to do it once rather than have to do it multiple times. So that's just an informational piece for you to start to kind of imagine what that might look like. Brian?
Well, when you're talking about that, I saw a similar situation when we were in Minnesota. The front view, you're talking about that distance being an issue. The platform and the seat actually folded back off in, so that it was still a traditional pew, but that seat deck folded out so they could create that larger space there.
Yeah.
In the front.
Yeah, so there's ways. Yeah, there's multiple ways to get at the flexibility that just offers a little bit more, kind of around the edges about how do things get flexible around the edges so that the space can be used for different things. When we're here on a Sunday morning, our hope and expectation is that the congregation is full, there's seating, people have a space, they feel like there's a place for me. That is absolutely what we want. What happens is that sometimes in the year we have smaller services. We haven't done it for the last couple of years because of the pandemic, but when we do something like the longest night service, it's not a big service, but it's a really significant and important service for the people that gather who are grieving or who have lost loved ones. It can feel strange to have a small group in a large space trying to gather for worship. And so one of the things Pastor Hoffman and I have said is, are there some ways that the space could be reconfigured, not on a weekly basis, but on an occasional basis, so that when we have an intentionally small service, maybe one when there's only going to be 30 people here, that feels more like they belong in the space, and they're not just in a space that's too big for them and there are a few bodies there, but they're in a space that has been intentionally set for them. If you have ever been in a worship experience like that, you know that it's a different feeling to be in a space that feels like it has been set for the gathering that is there, as opposed to being in a space that is happening in the space that's available, whether or not it feels like it's the right space for the gathering. I don't know if that is clear, but it's different. Yeah?
Who would be responsible then for making all these changes for the various groups that we would want to accommodate then?
We would work with staff. We'd probably have to have some folks that would be willing to do this, but it would be an occasional basis, not a weekly basis, because there's some effort if you're going to move things around.
Right.
Yeah.
And my concern is that we're having trouble getting volunteers already, even for ushering. How do you get volunteers to do that, to accommodate these groups that you want to bring in?
Yeah.
That's something I think we need to consider.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think I would add that that's already something we're attending to as more groups use our space. With recitals, for example, part of the role of the volunteer and ministry support coordinator, with Mark Fink's role, is to work with them to see what they need. And that might mean that there is a small fee or something to reconfigure the space if that's needed. That can be built into what those arrangements are if that's needed. But those are the sorts of considerations that we're already invested in, that we do as it is with our space when we change the bell tables out for seats you know. So I think your point is taken that there's volunteers involved, but it's also that we're already living into the ways that we need to say, what is needed in the coming season and how do we recruit people for it? And sometimes our plans need to be based on who is available and how we can organize people to help make things happen. So it will always, you know, be responsive to who's available and how we can do that. But if it also facilitates greater usage and participation, that's very much our goal. And I think anytime we can be clear about our mission, that is motivating to people. It's motivating to me when I know why I'm serving or why I'm helping. And I think this invites us to be ever more intentional about that.
Thank you. I just want to comment that I have been here for many things. Boy Scout Eagle ceremonies, many different recital groups. The space has been more than adequate for all of them. So I don't see a need to change the space for those kinds of groups. And the only other thing I'd like to mention is when you go back and show the schematic there of showing, putting chairs in instead of, thank you. The schematic there does not tell the story that the chairs actually do over here. There's only 11 chairs there right now. And I would submit that just the final pew against the back wall could have handled 11 people easily. So we're not gaining anything, we're losing.
The pews that were there had room for 31 people at 24 inches a person. And I figure we can easily get 30 over there. If those tables weren't there, I figured we could get 30. There's a dozen there now.
What year how long ago did you calculate 31 people sitting on the left
I calculated it from the original layout with all those pews over there, with 5 rows of pews.
5 rows of pews and only 31 people?
Well, I can give you a little bit of detail, or I can show you the picture I use. You know, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, there's 5 pews, back one, room for 10, second one 9, third one 7, fourth one 5, fifth one 3. Yeah. I mean, yeah. So, anyhow, that's how I figured. I did a lot of, during the pandemic, when we were looking to reopen, we did a lot of calculating of number of people and room in the seats and stuff like that.
Dave, I think you had a question as well. David?
I came from Trinity Emmanuel in Gates, and we had flexible seating, similar to what you showed, you know, on the screen. And the ability to do so many different things is so enhanced by that kind of seating. It does take perhaps some getting used to, you know, if you're used to seats. But what you're able to do in that space is so much enhanced. Different kinds of services, you rearrange, you know, the seating. You know, Pastor Amy, you mentioned, you know, when you have a smaller group and you want to do it in the sanctuary, you get lost in there. So the flexible seating answers a lot of issues in regards to that. And the seats can be different lengths, armchairs. I mean, it does wonders in terms of your ability to use that space adequately for a lot of different things and purposes.
Did your church have recliners?
We didn't have recliners,
Oh, okay.
but yeah, it was wonderful.
Yeah, you want to give it to another person? I just want to say a note that So, I mean, I think, Wayne, this goes to your question about seating and size. I mean, I think when you're planning a sanctuary, I think people often say you plan 24 inches per person. What we know is that the reality is that if you have a family, if you have a family of 5, they don't need 10 feet. They're usually willing to squeeze into a smaller space, and so
It depends on, I mean, we've seen it, right? You can see my family could squeeze into the front pew right now. Give us 5 years and we won't fit. And
Yeah.
we've watched, I love it. We've watched families outgrow their pew. Like we can all think of them, right? Like, oh, the kids get bigger, so the ones that used to be able to squish together can no longer.
Yeah.
Just to illustrate that.
yeah. But so the other thing that is the flexible seating accommodates, like when you have individual seating, it really is one person, one seat. And so your seating capacity goes down if you transition from traditional pews to something like individual seats. If you go to a more flexible seating plan, there's probably still a little bit of loss, but there's more flexibility if if you have a row that includes, a triple and a double. On the surface, that's 5 people, but in reality, it's going to be able to accommodate more than that. So it becomes a little bit, it's flexible. I mean, people will use the space differently than they would if it's individual chairs. John, you had a question or something?
Well, I got in late because we were counting money.
Yeah.
Kind of a necessary thing around here. Flexible, are they fixed to the floor or are they movable?
They move.
They're movable.
That doesn't make me as big a fan as I would have been before. All right, let me explain. I mean, I'm here to work.
I mean, they're still very solid. Like they're not like
Yeah, I know,
shimmying
but
around.
When you're reconfiguring, I mean, they're not light. I don't
Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
I see.
They're not light.
Yes.
Okay. That's just a consideration.
Yeah, Kathy. Let's.
I'm curious, when you speak of flexibility, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. We just want live stream people to get here.
When you speak of flexibility and different areas that are going to accommodate different people, how do you plan for that other than a concert that's scheduled, a scout meeting that's scheduled? How do you anticipate that kind of flexibility?
So what I know from talking to other congregations is that when the plan is drawn for their space, the plan is drawn with multiple options of how to use the furniture that you have to create different floor plans. And so there are a couple of clear schematics that are developed that say, if this is the floor plan that you want, this is the schematic of how you set up the space. If this is the arrangement, you're going to have a small worship service, you want seating for 50, this is how you arrange the furniture to set up the space. So that's part of what happens with the furniture companies, is to develop the schematics for how you use the furniture to create the space that you're looking for. So you give them a couple of different scenarios.
That much I get, but what I'm speaking of is the reality of any particular time and space when, you see what, I'm sorry, maybe I'm just missing
So
something.
what we already do, our planning process already is, okay, we know this Sunday is going to have a baptism and the bells are going to play and the chancel choir is going to sing. So we need to make sure the bell tables are set up. We need to make sure we have a space perhaps roped off for the baptismal party. Oh, we happen to know that grandma from the baptismal party is in a wheelchair, so we need to make sure the ushers know that to leave space at the end of the pew. Like, we already do that. And so this becomes an additional set of considerations when something like that happens. We're having a funeral. We know the funeral is going to include a casket. If we were in a scenario that included any measure of flexible seating, we would probably say, we're going to just take the front row out for that service because we would like more space to maneuver around the casket. We are planning the longest night service. The longest night service is a time for people who are grieving the loss of a loved one to come together during the Christmas, as part of the Christmas season. When I lead that service, one of the most powerful times is when we can gather around the font to remember the completion of the baptismal promise, that those who have died with Christ are raised with Christ, while we have our candles singing Silent Night. In this current space, and especially when the 5 pews were there, how do you get 25 people to gather around the font? You weave through the pews in a really weird, awkward way, and then some people sort of stand up because we take away the altar rail, and they kind of stand up on the altar. And then if we want to really have a sense that we are now feasting together on the meal of Holy Communion that sustains us for those of us who are still on our earthly journey, there is no way to kind of gather. I guess go back to your seats and I'll look, but 30 people, no one listens when you say only sit in the first 2 or 3 pews. I can tell you that, and you might know that from your own experience. So if we had flexible seating, it might be that we rope off the last, however, and we arrange these seats in a semicircle, and we bring the font to right in the middle so it is clear that we are gathered around the sacraments of communion and baptism, which is doable when you are expecting a service of 30 people. And it's actually minimal moving of furniture because it's probably only the first 2 seats that, if they're flexible, can be arranged into a bit of a semicircle. Those are just illustrations of the kinds of things that are possible. It may or may not be that those are of value or of a high enough value at this moment in time that we decide to go in that direction. So part of the discussion today is to say, no matter what, we've got to replace this carpet. We cannot live with bubbles anymore. That's a safety hazard, and Bob's going to run out of staples, which is how he is currently making our carpet stick to the ground. If we replace the carpet, our choices are replace it as is, which continues. You can see the outline of our carpet also impacts the seating arrangement, right? It is fixed to this outline. So our choices are, number 1, replace as is. If you see carpet, it is getting replaced as carpet, probably carpet squares, because those are going to work better going forward, but you won't be able to tell. It'll still look like this. That locks us into this configuration. We can discuss whether we put the pews back in, we didn't get rid of them, or whether we stay with this kind of flexibility, and we live with flexibility on the margins. That's how I would call option 1. Option 2 is what Bob put up, of shorten some of the pews. Bring in some chairs, maybe get a few that have arms for the people that need arms, but we keep the bulk of the pews as they are, and we just shorten them on the edges so that we have more flexibility on the margins. Maybe we take out the first pew and make those a row of chairs to allow us a little more space up here when that's necessary, but we keep the bulk of this as is. Option 3 is the whole hog, and it says we get rid of all of the pews, we purchase all flexible seating like this, and we make the flooring consistent throughout the entire sanctuary so that we can do anything we dream of, or we can stay in this exact configuration, but the world is our oyster, right? Those are kind of the 3 paths. And the reason the Refresh Committee is coming today is to say, our 5, 6, 7 people can't sit around and decide what the entire congregation wants to do, because those are 3 different paths that not only have different implications, but they have a different way of using the space. And this is a chance to just kind of take the temperature of which path should they be going down, as is, more flexibility on the margins, or full flexibility. And this is not like a binding commitment, it is that's kind of the 3 discussion points.
Do you have
Jeff?
ballpark estimates of what you think those 3 would be?
We do not.
Well,
Wild guesstimates. The given things are not high dollars, and there's funds for those in the capital reserve. Things like the carpets, things like the stained glass windows. What we've done so far.
All those are fine.
Yeah.
yeah.
The seating decision. All replace everything or shorten them. And then there was the first one.
Yeah.
Seems like we're already there at the first one.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah. This is the first one. Second is shorten pews. Third is replace all the seating.
Shortening pews won't be expensive. Getting a large amount of flexible seating, I don't have a feel for the cost of that. Those chairs are $80 to $100 each for that kind of chair, but for the for the more interesting that sort of stuff, I do not know.
I mean, it is probably on the order of tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands.
Yes.
Just 5 figures, not 6 figures,
I-
is probably.
I think all the flexibility you're talking about is excellent. And that's the sanctuary. Those pocket doors were put in for a reason. No one has mentioned that if we got a big crowd, you open those doors. And that continues the sanctuary.
Right, and we saw on Easter Sunday how essential that was.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
it's that way Christmas and
Yeah,
Easter.
so when we have a larger congregation, we have a way to accommodate.
Right, so you don't try to fit in everything for the largest
Yeah.
congregation.
Yeah,
Fit in what's normal for what you're talking about.
yeah.
You want more space flexibility? Flexibility here, there, everywhere. So you can change the configuration of the sanctuary.
Yeah. Linda, there's a couple more over there.
I think when you're talking about cost, you also have to factor in the maintenance if you go with flexible seating, because you think I'm assuming that they're upholstered. Is that correct? I mean, that picture, they look
Yeah.
upholstered? Okay, so you have to think about sweat and grime that's going to be absorbed over time. Who's going to clean that? That's an extra cost for replacing. Children come into the sanctuary, they're given snacks, they're encouraged to draw on their bulletins, markers, things like that. Think about an upholstered chair that you sit in at a doctor's office. Do you want that to be the potential look of our sanctuary? I mean, seriously, that's if you look at some of those chairs over there already, they're stained, right? So potentially we're looking at that as the look of our sanctuary as opposed to pews, which are much easier to clean. They may not be the most comfortable, they may not give the most flexibility, but I think an overall look of the sanctuary provides a much cleaner, welcoming look. And I think that's something that we have to consider.
Let me get Jerry. We have heard that from people. I visited a church and they said, hey, you got to,
Yeah.
I think some do. Yeah.
I think there's a wide range.
There's a wide range.
Yeah.
Okay. When it comes to funerals, because we have a casket here so seldom, can we simply remove the front 2 pews that week? That would make at least the basic sanctuary all match,
Yeah,
all go together.
It depends. I mean, sometimes we have time.
I'm not done.
We have time to make the adjustments. Sometimes, I mean, it depends on how much lead time we have. Sometimes
Right.
we get a phone call. Will you do it's Monday. Will you do a funeral on Thursday? The people that normally help us with those things are gone or on vacation. I mean,
Right.
we have. I mean, so those are challenges. in
Right.
that. It is
So-
possible.
so
It is
there's
possible.
The chance
Those are
that it
challenges.
could happen instantly.
Yes.
My real concern is thinking back to, I think, 2007, when we put the narthex addition on. And Synod warned us that, generally speaking, if the sanctuary is 65% full, I think it was 65 or 2/3 or something like that, then a visitor feels that the congregation is sufficient, that they aren't needed, that they're too crowded in the sanctuary. So we really don't want to limit our potential growth by having visitors sit in the narthex or not have at least as the seating we have with pews when they come to visit. I just don't want too many seats taken out so that we are far above the two-thirds that Synod recognizes as.
So, I mean, I
need.
think it's important to note that with flexible seating, it would be roughly at least this amount of seats. And I will say what I'm noticing.
Right.
I notice a lot of people sit on the ends of pews. It turns out that's actually one of, I think there's a lot of ways to be unwelcome, and there's a lot of ways to be hospitable. Sitting on the ends of pews and leaving a lot of space in the middle, which is kind of our practice here, very unwelcoming, even if you have more than a third open capacity, as we still often do on a Sunday morning.
Right, but I'm not
So-
sure we had a third open this morning or last week.
I would guess it's pretty close to it, because it's about how the space is used.
In which case, a visitor would not feel like coming back.
I
we
think those
could
are
use
guidelines, not hard and fast, but I
Right.
think we are still talking about a similar amount to this space of pews. So we're not talking about lessening it from what we currently have. So if it's a problem right now, it would be a problem, whether it's flexible or
Well, you're
pew
putting,
seating.
you're putting arms in the middle of pews, and you're still going to have trouble with people walking all the way in. So
Perhaps.
it's just another consideration that we don't want to limit our seating so much that it limits our growth.
220. We were 113 today. Little fire department sign says 318. That would be a service. That's with no pews. That's with everybody's. That's the mosh pit layout.
I'm conscious that we're at 11:15, and so I want to make sure that if other folks that haven't had a chance have questions or comments, Marcia has one, I think Jeff has one, that we just get, and Jerry has one, that we get a chance to hear from those folks.
Okay, I wanted to make just a couple comments. First of all, to your concern about the care of it, in our previous church, we were there for 25 years, they looked almost identical to those chairs there. And I think David would confirm, the cushions were not a problem. A stain or anything was almost never a problem. It was never there. We never replaced a single cushion, and to my knowledge, they haven't at this point, which is now 6 years more. So I don't think that is a real concern as far as the standing quality of them. The second thing that I want to say is that, again, having experienced a lot of years with that kind of flexible seating, most of it was just, let's move these chairs out for this event, and they went back. We weren't concerned about volunteers or whatever, to come in and make major changes. And those kind of situations are pretty random, and they don't take up as much time as you think for doing that. And I just think that it was wonderful to just be able to, for the children's program, to move out that first row of chairs and have space, and not how to figure how to crowd them in among the altar and stuff. It was, I would say, for my experience, it was 95% wonderful to have some flexible seating. I'm not even referring to the entire thing, but just for those areas up front.
Jeff?
Thank you very much.
Jerry. We have Jeff and Jerry, I think.
Just to end with a word of humor. 2 weeks ago, Pat and I joined this church. Why'd we pull one on you? You didn't tell us you were going to make changes in your church.
How do you plan on proceeding forward? Are you going to put this to a membership vote, or is it going to be up to the committee to make the decision?
The committee can make recommendations, any spending is gonna have to be authorized by the congregation. So, I mean, so the congregation will have to make a decision because the spending has to be authorized by the congregation. So
And that is true even if all we do is replace the carpet.
yeah,
Like,
we still are gonna have to have a
anything
meeting.
outside of the budget to spend anything even out of capital reserves needs to go to the congregation. So out of the 3 scenarios, all would come to the congregation for expenditure unless we found a way to do it for free, which is not likely. So
If someone today would like to make a gift to take care of it, then we wouldn't have to have another meeting.
That's true.
I'm just saying.
A quick comment.
good actually constitutionally to spend the gift.
Oh, all right, never mind.
A,
Well, you
But
can
if
still,
someone came in instead of night and just did it,
yeah.
a quick comment. St. John's and Victor also has the flexible pews. So if you want to do a field trip just down to Victor, you can do that, and they'll show you what they've got. Significantly as well, when we get to that capacity issue, we can also add worship services so that you're not all at the same place at the same time, but you can spread out a little bit more. So I understand the issue. As a Buffalo Bills fan, I'm surprised that the capacity of the new stadium is going to be much less than the existing stadium, but that's because people are asking for that, so life goes on.
Jerry had a comment as well over here, I think.
My question is more basic. You're talking about the various things that are needed here. I never seem to be able to get an answer. I'm talking about one thing that you must have in this church 6 months out of the year: heat. This is a cool church. It's cool, but it's not warm. But we tolerate that, and we can. My question is to the proper committee: are the furnaces in this building adequate for the next 10 to 20 years? Or, and I have another example in a post that I belong to. Skip that. My question is merely, are the heating systems in this building 100%? Are they 93% efficient? I'm just looking for the status before you put down new carpeting. If all of a sudden you say in November, the furnace broke and it's freezing in here, and you can't even have it. That's my question.
Do you want to answer that, Bob?
Yeah, I can answer that. We have 4 different heating systems in the building. The main one, the main boiler, that goes back to the early 60s. They don't make them like they used to. Our guy says, keep this one going because it's a good one. We know they have a lifetime. We know what it costs to fix them and replace them. So we're keeping it up. If you're like, shivering on Sunday morning, let us know. We set it to, I think, 68. But yeah, we try and manage it, keep the place comfortable. So, but yeah, we're on top of that.
Oh, that's just a question.
That's a large activity for me.
I'm just curious if these pews are paid for yet.
I don't know, Glenda, have we paid for these pews?
Have we paid for these pews?
These are all paid for, right? Everything we have now?
we have no
Yes.
debt.
We have no debt.
So we have no mortgage anymore?
We have no debt.
No debt.
No debt.
We are lucky in a lot of ways.
For people who maybe can't hear, Glenda just said, we have no debt, and we have a significant capital reserve that includes things like repairing stained glass windows that need repair, replacing carpet is in there, things like furnace repairs when those need to be made, or replacement when the time comes. So the council has been very diligent over the years in putting in place a capital reserve fund so that when we have an emergency, we have the means to respond as we need to.
And so that we have, and so that when we have expected replacements and repairs, we can do that, which, to be clear, the carpet is an expected one. Like, we've been dealing with the bubbling issue for a decade, and the carpet needs to be replaced one way or another, and that is part of the capital reserve. But in replacing the carpet, it's just a question of, are we doing the entire floor, or are we keeping the arrangement where some wood is exposed? And that requires the conversation about the pews, which were not a consideration in the capital reserve, but the stained glass and the carpeting is already kind of accounted for in the capital reserve.
Yep. I know that there will be other questions and things that people are wondering about, and so as a reminder, the people on the Sanctuary Refresh Committee include Bob, Margie Gall, David Chafee, both Ray Lynn and Jim are on it because they've been helping to think about how to use the sanctuary, or Pastor Hoffman or I. So if you have other comments or questions, that is the group. They will be continuing to work to kind of move plans forward based on kind of the conversation that we've had and as we continue to gather information. So just so you know, those are the people that you can ask if you have questions. And I think I can say that they will continue to keep you informed, and at some point in the fairly near future, we will need to convene a congregational meeting so that we can make authorizations for the stained glass window and whatever it is that we're going to do in here in terms of carpeting and things like that. So be on the lookout for that, because that will happen probably sooner rather than later. All right? Thank you for staying. Thank you for being here, and thanks for staying today.